All right, we're on.
How you doing, folks? Welcome to Clickbait. This is Kevin. I'm Chris. Hello, my small circle of friends. One day we'll say that non-ironically, I'm sure.
Are you sure?
No, not really.
All right.
Not really.
How was your holiday?
It was not too bad, actually. It was
Not too bad.
pretty chill.
Did you get to stay home and stuff?
Yeah, I got to stay home. I got to work on some music. Got to catch up on some reading and did a little video gaming and just kind of relaxed. It was pretty nice. How about yours?
That's cool. Just got back today from my second iteration of family Christmas.
Always good to have more than one.
Lincoln, Nebraska, with my wife's family. So that was super fun. And I'm exhausted, so if I'm a little sluggish, I do apologize.
I feel
apologize, America.
Hey! I feel like second Christmas is really drop the significance of enjoyment the older you get and the less presents you get. You
right.
just have to deal with the same family stuff.
You know what? I actually find that the less presents that I get now is an increase in happiness because I just need to like...
You're not devoting a lot of time to the whole...
And I'm not spending a whole lot on other people.
That helps too, yeah. The expectation of if you get me something, I have to give you something. Yeah, I get that.
We're still trying to get my family to acknowledge the fact that we're grown-ups and we should really probably not be buying each other presents for Christmas anymore.
Yeah, it does track. I think my uncles have a pretty blanket opinion that after you get 18, you don't get any more presents from us.
And I'm fine with that.
Good.
Totally fine with that. Let's get together, have dinner for 5 hours, and then we can all go
Call it a night. Definitely.
I think that sounds incredible.
And you said you were also exiled from the internet during this time. Is that correct?
Self-imposed exile. It was too much for me, but and I'm working on my applications for graduate school and things like that. So I've really been
Kevin.
I've been trying to stay off of the internet. So I really have no idea what's going on in the world today, which is fine.
A militia took over a federal building, as far as I'm aware.
Where at?
In Oregon.
Oregon?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Something to do with they were protesting one of their sons. Something happened with them. I don't know. I barely got the gist of it before I left and come over here, but I want to read more on it because it sounds kind of interesting. But as far as I could tell, they are armed militia that are just kind of chilling out there, and they're in negotiations right now to try to back down. So I don't know.
So
that could have been
way to garner public support for the Second Amendment.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it had to do with burning things, like the right to burn things and the right to have guns. And so whenever you go after one of those two things, it's gonna cause a violent reaction.
Collectively known as the right to destroy shit up.
Yep.
As
country or otherwise, but yeah. So that is seems like an interesting thing. I kind of want to read more on it, but like I said, I didn't get a chance to. That could have been wildly inflated the title and
it could have been
buzzline. But my friend from Oregon, he was asking about it.
We ought to check YouTube because the last time there was there was a call to arms for militia people in Oregon.
What was that?
I don't know. It was a couple of years ago, I think, and I can't even remember what it was about now. But the guys that originally made the call to arms or whatever, they settled their court case or whatever, and they put out this public statement to get all these militia people to not come to Oregon. And then I found all these YouTube videos of these crazy ass fucking militia people that were saying don't come to Oregon. But it's a fucking trick.
It's a trap. It's a trap to stay at home.
They need our help, man. It's just okay.
That's fascinating. I kind of forget that Oregon.
I think it was either Oregon or Washington. It might have been.
Well, I forget that. Well, both. Oregon. It's got Portland and it's got Seattle. It's kind of like the little hipster scenes or whatever. I forget that there's wild expanses of wilderness that people probably camped out in with guns.
Backwoods ass motherfuckers hiding out in.
Yeah,
hanging out with
Bigfoot. They don't have YouTube, right? They don't know that we're doing this.
I don't know.
They probably don't know that we're doing this either way. So I guess it's okay. But Interesting. Well, yeah. So that was the only thing that I saw major in the news today. But I think we had agreed we're going to talk about some drugs today.
Unfortunately, no longer just in time for the holidays, but the holidays always make me think a lot more about drugs.
Yeah, it certainly helps get through that second Christmas party.
Are you ready to lose our jobs if anybody from work ever watches this episode?
Well, surely no one would ever have to lose their jobs due to something like just an opinion being shared, right?
Yeah.
What?
I was watching an episode or listening to an episode of Ari Shafir the other day about DMT, and then I realized halfway through that
I remember you
listening on my workplace computer and thought maybe that might not have been such a great idea.
One of these. He really does. Like,
I'm controlling you with this right now as we speak.
Are you suggesting that is the reason you could not do it, because you are controlling this camera from work?
No, not at all.
All right. I just wanted to get you on the record for that. But
no, if I'm at work, there's nobody here.
Well, I hope that, unlike I'm sure someone you have to tell me about, you don't lose your job for that. So
yeah, I don't think I will, but because I don't think anybody's watching.
No, I have some interesting things to talk about with drug tests, actually.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Interesting. We can get into that whenever. Well, I'll wait for something else later. Go ahead with your. So someone's been fired for drug use, or not drug use, for drug opinions.
I'm paranoid about that particular issue. I mean, it's still messed up in this country where you can lose your job for something that you did 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. Yes.
And that in no way affected your work performance in any way, shape, or form.
Absolutely. I can almost understand it with a injury where they do drug testing. I could see it like that, or if you were causing a problem. But as a blanket random drug tests, that seems way over the line for me.
Drug tests are really interesting as well because so first of all the urine analysis, which is the typical means of running a drug test, not quite so effective as you might think. So there's a lot of problems with them. The famous Mythbusters
what episode was that?
There was it was in the first season.
Really?
Where Jamie and Adam proceeded to eat large amounts of poppy seed bagels and lemon poppy seed cake.
Did they fail? Because I've always heard that. They failed
consistently for
opiates?
Something like 48 hours for opiates.
That's fascinating. My dad will not eat poppy seed bread because of that. Not because of the episode, but because of that belief.
But because of that belief. And it is actually true.
That is fascinating.
And it's really interesting because Adam was calling the companies that manufactured the urine tests, and they were just so perplexed that anyone would even bring up the notion of a false positive.
Yeah, well, that is actually a connection with another story that I had. It goes with that as well, where these sorts of tests that we're administrating aren't near as accurate as you would like them to be when they're determining someone's future, your current job status, your
particularly
eligibility for kids, taking care of kids.
I think part of the problem is that the urine analysis tests are relatively cheap. They can be done on a large scale. And in order to determine if someone is currently under the influence of a drug, like marijuana or something of that nature, you would actually have to do a blood test.
And that is
blood tests
far more expensive, but it
is far more expensive, but it shows that there is currently, whether or not there is currently active THC in the person's bloodstream. And then urine analysis tests for the metabolites of THC. So it detects something that it detects it for up to 4 weeks. 4 to 5 weeks. Interesting thing, cocaine shows up for a really short period of time. I want to say it's the maximum is 48 hours.
Don't I fucking know it. There's a reason why I never smoked pot, Kevin.
So
what are your thoughts on, does a company have a right to
no.
It doesn't, yeah. And
I don't even know what your question is.
Where I'm going
no.
there. As far as
workers' rights, goddammit.
There should be, and I mean, you see this with cases of public shaming as well, where I know of at least a few situations where someone made a post on Facebook or something like that. I got into a big hissy fit across the nation about this, something that she said taken into, or something he said taken into like a racist or insensitive account, and that actually getting them fired from their job, which seems questionable to me. I mean, I guess I almost see where they're coming from with that, but then at the same time, like, is that impacting your ability to do your job?
So you've been publicly shamed, sort of.
Sure. And I mean, taking that and then running with that in the drugs direction, like, if you're actively using drugs on the job and that is in fact impacting your ability to do your job, I could see that. But as far as a lifestyle choice, you have no legal precedent over your employees' bodies or anything like that. I've had questions of how they've managed to.
And I was just talking to a friend on the phone about this today, because we were talking about going in to work hungover, and because for those of you who aren't quite aware, I do have a bit of an alcohol problem. Which I should mention, actually, this month I've been doing pretty good.
That's nice. Yeah, you've been away.
I've been cutting back quite a bit.
If you can go to family Christmas without drinking a lot, I think you're doing all right.
Yeah, that wasn't really by choice. I tried to drink a lot over Christmas, but it just somehow it didn't work out. My family members are not as well stocked up as I would like them to be.
Gotcha.
So,
have you considered portable wine boxes?
I have.
Okay.
I haven't made use of that. Maybe next year.
Okay.
But no. Yeah, no secret. With my close friends, I'm pretty open about the fact that I am probably what you would classify as a high-functioning alcoholic.
Yeah, that's it. You get by all right.
Meaning that I, for several years, was drunk for several hours.
For several years.
For several hours every single day. And was having a really hard time quitting. I am making some headway, or not quitting, but because I think that quitting is sort of like a false concept.
Yeah.
So if you, I mean, in a way, so my idea of successfully beating an addiction, from my perspective, is to where I don't have to be afraid of the thing that I'm addicted to.
Sure.
So I've gotten to the point over the past month where, I can have 2 beers in a night and leave it at that. 2 beers with dinner or something.
Yep.
And leave it at that. I consider that a pretty good success. It's been hard.
Understandable.
In contrast to some other substances that I've used throughout my life.
Yeah, which you never had too
which
much
I
problem
did not
with.
have any problem with at all. We're talking about cannabis here, guys. Or I'm talking about cannabis.
I'm talking about lots of shit.
Chris is talking about a lot of shit. I have very limited experience, personal experience with anything other than alcohol, nicotine, and cannabis myself. But,
and just to be clear, I am clean at this point. I just have had a fascinating history of pretending to be a rock star when I was not a rock star.
You were a folk rock star.
I was a folk rock star, in my mind, at least. In my mind.
Yeah.
But in fact, I think that might be a large. There may be other problems as well, but a large degree why we all stopped playing music together. So
I think there's probably few of us out there that haven't really been affected by the war on drugs to some extent.
That is absolutely true. Yeah.
Before I knew you, I mean, my sister has done 2 separate prison terms for cocaine and methamphetamines.
Gotcha.
She's battled that for a really long time. Luckily, out now and clean and doing well at this moment. So
that's good.
Glad about that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've always felt, and I'll share with about my friend of my family. He had gotten out of jail, not, or I guess it was prison, probably parole, and he had been in there for a while, but had gotten paroled, was doing really good, had a slip, and ended up testing negative, I believe, for one of his probation, and he
positive.
Yeah, positive. Excuse me. Yeah, sorry. Negative for being sober.
Negative for being sober.
Yep. And I think it was either that or he got busted with a small quantity on him. It was one of those two, and it's been a few years.
Do you know what it was? Was it like cocaine?
I believe like cocaine, which is classed a little bit more severely than other drugs for whatever reason that is, but it is usually a felony when you get cocaine. Yeah, he got like 12 years for, you know, a single like misstep, and I think that that's a kind of concerning policy. I think that any sort of recovery is going to have bumps and things like that, and I get that he was on probation or parole, and he was expected that. He knew what it was, you know, at stake, but at the same time, like, these aren't always informed choices that you make. These, you know, circumstances can lead you down dark roads that don't always lead you to make the choice that makes sense. And are we going to punish someone for that on a long,
and that's
long,
what it really comes
scale
down to, I think, is the idea of punishment.
Yeah.
Right. Because let's be real. We're not talking about rehabilitation.
No, we're not.
Because I mean,
well, it's interesting because I do think those two things are absolutely linked, though, because I think by the fact that we have such severe punishments, I know at least for me, it makes the attempts to seek out help, you're almost either disqualified from help until you are in trouble, like you can't get the funding, or you know that it is so, like, morally, socially, and legally considered both irresponsible and just plain out, like, you know, criminal behavior, that you're not going to ever go seek that help. You're not able to seek that help.
There's a huge stigma attached to it, which is really interesting.
And you can't get past that unless you you know, unless you're generally caught, is what I found most people is once they're already in the system on that, then they can finally, you know, seek out some of the help that they want with the funds.
Yeah, because what damage is it going to do at that point once you've already been caught? You know, once you've already got the record and so on and so forth, it's already there. But and you know, like when we send people to prison for drugs, basically, there's the first wave of punishment when we send people to prison, correct? And then once they get out of prison, they now have a criminal record. They now have, they're a convicted felon.
Yes.
So the options for them to get back into society and become a functioning member of society at that point are almost non-existent.
Same with, I mean, you're looking at jobs, you're looking at school applications, and if you were by chance at school on a federal grant, when you get caught, you are fucking done as far as they're concerned. You will never have an education that is not paid for by yourself.
Well, I mean, even if you simply have a record, it doesn't have to be on school property or anything. That record disqualifies you from financial aid.
Of course.
So you can't seek a higher education unless you're doing some sort of a program that exists within the prison that you happen to be in.
And even then, I mean, it is a uphill battle. Even if you haven't gone to prison, I mean, I've seen applications for jobs that ask if you've had a fucking misdemeanor, and I think that is crazy. And I will give all props to Obama, as few as I will give him sometimes, but he is really like I don't know. I can't tell, because he's finally like doing some of the shit that like I expected him to do, like, you know,
right away,
like 8 years ago. Yeah. But talking about getting rid of the checkbox, yes or no felon,
convicted of a felony,
phenomenal. I think that's great.
I think it's a good start. I don't think it's enough.
No, certainly
as
not
with
enough.
A lot of things that Obama
does. that our government does, period. I think that any progress in a good direction, I sometimes view as a victory, but I agree with you, that is woefully inadequate as far as what
and I used to do the hiring for a company that I worked for. And
they tell you that doesn't disqualify you, but I bet it does, doesn't it?
It does.
It does. Yeah,
it does.
You set
It
that
absolutely
in a
does.
whole other fucking pile.
No one that ever checked that box has ever received a call back.
Yep. That sounds about right. And so you get people...
And this is from me, and
yeah, which, I mean, obviously you don't have a problem with it. So it's not even just the person who's doing the hiring has a problem. Usually it is a company policy, said or unsaid.
Yeah, exactly. And well, in this case, it was said to me. You don't say it to the applicants, of course.
Yeah.
However, it is most definitely a disqualification for most positions, and so, like, the fact that not only is sending drug addicts to prison not a process of rehabilitation, it's almost an impediment.
It is.
Well, I mean, almost. No, it's definitely an impediment.
Yeah, I would
to real rehabilitation. I mean, aside from the fact that once someone has a criminal record, as you mentioned before, the damage has basically been done at that point. So at that point, they can feel a little bit more free to seek help.
Certainly that.
Which is interesting.
More even than that, sorry not to cut you off, but okay. More even than that is you have funding available to you once you go to jail or once you go to prison. Mm-hmm. Before that, if you seek out that funding, you're on your own pretty much. At least here in Kansas. That may be different at some other places, but I know most places from the people that I've met who've had those sort of situations.
Because the focus is that the people that are addicted to drugs are deviants. Yes. They are social outcasts, and that that they've chosen to break the law just for breaking the law's sake, or what have you. And we have this stigma about that, and so it's just a disciplinarian approach that turns these populations of people into enemies of the state, essentially. And so there's some interesting statistics that I've got here. This is actually from Huffington Post, and it was... it's called Just How Much the War on Drug Impacts Our Overcrowded Prisons in One Chart. So some interesting information about the United States prisons. I think a lot of people that are probably listening to this podcast are already aware of the statistic that the United States has 25% of the world's population of prisoners, despite the fact that the United States population itself is only 5% of the global population.
That's even interesting. I would like to see how that... how we even compare to like some sort of dictatorial state where we've got political prisoners and things like that.
Right.
You would think that there would be more there.
There's not,
depending on population. But I fully agree. I don't think that there are, and I think that so maybe while some of these people that we're talking to may know what these things are, some of the statistics there are so vast that it's important to. Yeah. At least know what you're dealing with, I think. So, I had 2.3 million in prison currently, or close to, approximately. Maybe that's a lowball figure. I don't know, but that was total, and then half total of that prisoners being drug offenses.
Right. So let's see here. This is from 2014. That's where my numbers are, and looks like the. Can I find out what the total amount of the United States prison population is? Not on this particular article.
Gotcha.
But yeah, 50.1% are of United States prisoners are currently in jail for drug offenses, for nonviolent drug offenses.
Like not to be like totally cheesy, but do you remember in the 90s when they had that thing where they were paying sitcoms to do the drug episode where they taught people about drugs?
I hadn't heard about that.
Oh yeah, it's fascinating. I'll have to tell you about it more. We'll have to in the second part of this. I think we're going to do this short, by the way. We're going to try.
Yeah, we're going to cover one specific aspect of this, and we're going to cover some more tangential aspects of the war on drugs as we go along. This is going to be kind of a continuing series. So at this point, I guess we're going to basically try to focus on some legal issues and some interesting statistics that contradict sort of the narrative about the war on drugs. I would like to point out that 27.6% of the current U.S. population that are in prison for drugs are in prison for marijuana, which is fucking ridiculous.
It absolutely is, and I mean, some of these situations. Why is it ridiculous,
Chris? We should probably talk about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you look at the one thing that I got right here was that there was let me see here, the UN, and this goes directly towards that, estimated that let's see, there were 230 million illegal users worldwide. And that
I think I've heard some similar statistics.
And that might be, yeah, that's an approximate number, I'm sure, but 90% of those seem pretty non-problematic. Most of these people that are in jail are not committing other crimes, unless it is a crime that is tacked on because you were originally caught with drugs. For instance, when you're caught with firearms and drugs, that is a big no-no, and you get way higher sentencing for that, whether or not you were actively doing something illegal or not, except for just holding the drugs and the firearm at the same time.
I can kind of understand that, I guess.
I get the implication, but you look at let's say mom and pop grow or whatever, like some kids growing something in their backyard, and they have a shotgun in the house.
So just in the house. Just so not actually on their person.
Yeah, definitely. I know that on your person is also a really bad thing when you're out and about, of course, and I get that a little bit more.
I guess that's where I was coming from.
Yes,
if you've got a gun in your house,
you would think that would not. And maybe that doesn't always. Maybe they don't always go the hardest they can against these people. But I know that most of the time you're dealing with a situation that involves mandatory minimums, and if you can get them in that higher class, the DA is going to. And so, I mean, maybe we should talk about mandatory minimums a little bit here.
Sure.
Basically, if you're not aware, mandatory minimums are basically like a cookie cutter-esque. If you did this, you get this amount of time. It removes any sort of individuality from the justice system.
The judge can't look at your situation on a case-by-case basis.
Which I've always been really confused by. And we looked up why it happened right before this, and I got the patent reason was because there was a drug problem.
Yeah, I think what we really need to talk about, if we're going to talk about mandatory minimums, is we've got to talk about the guy, the big cheese, the guy that started the war on drugs, Mr. I am not
Mr. Hippies. Oh,
Tricky Dicky.
Nixon?
Tricky Dicky.
Okay. That was Nixon. Sorry, guys. I thought it was hippies.
It was. The hippies started the war on drugs. Holy shit. I've just come to a realization. Richard Nixon. I don't have any more information about Tricky Dicky.
Well, he was the first president to declare a war on drugs. Obviously, this was during the sort of I assume it was in reaction, not directly during, but the sexual and revolution and stuff like that with all the. Is that after? I don't fucking know. I'm sorry, we're gonna cut this out.
Relating it to other events. Richard Nixon. Oops, Nixon. War on drugs. Bing.
Here, while he's looking that up.
I type very slowly right at the moment.
So I'm just gonna. I had a kind of interesting list that has to do with the prohibition of drugs, and I was just gonna see what the causes are and see if anyone feels like this is. So if you have any thoughts on any of these points, feel free to speak up. So one cost of prohibition is that it creates disrespect for the law.
Right.
And I think that's pretty apparent when you make what I was going to with the sitcom thing was there's a show called Sports Night, and it had this drug episode about marijuana, and it said they worked in this weird weaselly way.
Sports Night, that was a good show.
It was a great show, and they worked in this weird weaselly way of making it actually kind of pro at least not drugs, but pro non-prohibition. Yes.
All right. Pro
non-criminalization. How about that?
Okay.
So they just, the main character said something along the lines of anything that makes a criminal out of millions of people is
out of the population for doing what they want to do
is a blanket just bad law. That is not a law.
Right.
That is a joke. And that was kind of the
generally
principle.
You don't have things like widespread like larceny or
Yep.
things that actually harm other people. You generally don't have widespread problems with.
Yes, absolutely. I mean,
in and of themselves.
And the problem with and maybe we'll get onto that. But I had a cool quote, and I thought this was kind of interesting. Was prohibition goes beyond the bounds of reason, in that it attempts to control a man's appetites by legislation and makes a crime out of things that are not a crime. And that was Abraham Lincoln saying it. I thought that was kind of an interesting quote. But basically, yeah, it
well, I think you could say the same things about the alcohol prohibition.
Well, and that's where I'm getting on this one. Is that
you can say about drug prohibition.
Exactly. I think that they are 100% the same, except for maybe in the fact that alcohol is used by a wider degree in the population, but to a much more destructive effect. That would be my opinion anyway on it than say marijuana or anything like that. I think alcohol has been proven to have much greater influence on a person's either behavior or ability to operate heavy machinery, cars, things like that.
It's also much more closely associated with violence, the expression of violence.
That's right. And not to say that meth, anything like that, isn't, but
not nearly to the same degree.
Exactly, and when you have a problem on alcohol, you do not have a substance abuse problem that has led to something. You have and maybe on a person-to-person basis, but as far as society considers you're a violent person, not a drug person who did a violent thing, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, and that goes to the mandatory minimums that do kick up those excessive jail terms for people who are not who either are committing violent crime and then also had drugs. That automatically puts you in a higher category than just a person who did something. You can get combinations that allow you to get greater periods of time than rapists and murderers and things like that, just on their own. Right,
for having a plant in your pocket.
For having a plant while you, well, some of them for just having the drugs and not having any violent crime, but some like for having drugs and then maybe pushing someone or some, some minor offense that would not normally be taken so seriously. You get scheduled much higher in your sentencing, and the fact that the judge has no leeway over that is very questionable to me. I've never quite got that. So, but did you
I don't think that we're supposed to legislate.
Well, I mean. We're not supposed to legislate the judge's ability to...
The judge's ability, or the judge is supposed to be able to interpret the law and to dole out the sentencing based on what they think is appropriate, right?
Yeah, you would. That would be the hope. And I mean, granted...
So with mandatory minimums, and things like 3 strikes and other policies like that really does take the law out of the hands of judges and juries. And it's interesting also to note that when you are in front of a jury of your peers, those people are not aware of what the potentials for sentencing are.
Exactly. That is a really big thing. Is that
so? Neither your peers, neither the jury of your peers, nor the judge has the ability to determine what, or to even be aware of what your punishment would be if they're convicted. So.
And that removes the personality or the details of the crime, the thing that would allow you to declare extenuating circumstances. Not to say that you didn't do something, but to say that you did it, but it was, a mistake in some sort of way, or that you were pushed to do it by something else. And that doesn't excuse you from the crime, but it removes their ability to interpret what the situation is versus what the consequences. They're divorced from each other, and I don't think that's quite. That doesn't seem terribly constitutional to me, but I mean, I guess they've.
Well, I mean, even on a practical scale, it's sort of interesting, and I've been listening to a lot of like Gabor Mate recently, who's a famous physician who does a lot of research into the effects of the drug war, and does a lot of research into addiction in general. And so basically the results of his research indicate that there's a very powerful correlation between between people with childhood trauma and drug abuse. So
seems to track, yeah.
So from that perspective, it's sort of interesting that our way of dealing with people who've been traumatized and who are dealing with that in sort of the only natural, because when you do drugs, nobody ever talks about why they do drugs. Yeah. What does the drug do for you? Why is it that you've chosen to do this, or why is it that you're compelled to do this? And it's because I from my own perspective, from my own experience, again with alcohol and other substances, and the experiences of people that I know who have become drug addicts, is that the drug itself is their way of sort of achieving some sort of a sense of normalcy, right?
I would agree with that. Yeah, I mean, I think whether you have a actual traceable trauma or you
is it realistically a self-defeating cycle? I mean, sure it is, but should we really be in the business of legislating whether or not people should be allowed to make their own mistakes?
Well, it's all about. I mean, we're legislating on a criminal level what is essentially a welfare and health issue, which is crazy.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people that talk about, addiction. What is it? Addiction's not a crime. It's a disease.
Yeah. Yep.
I think I would go a lot more in towards the direction. I mean, I understand what that sort of idea is getting at, and I appreciate that it's moving people's consciousness away from the idea of criminalization.
It's an attempt to buzzword it into a
but I mean, addiction is a symptom.
And I think that right there is really the key, is that it is not the heart, it is not the root of it.
It's a symptom of something that we as a society are not addressing adequately, whether it be on an individual psychological basis, or whether it be on, a societal level of social frustration of,
Which certainly, is definitely a huge cause to that, at least as far as I can tell.
We talk about trauma, but what about the trauma of the mundane?
Exactly. That's exactly it.
Like, you don't Henry David Thoreau that says most men live a life of quiet desperation.
Sounds I think about right.
That has never been more true than in today's society. I mean, if you think about the outlets that the average person has for just for dealing with day-to-day angst, or the amount of ability that each of us has to sort of feel like we make a difference, or do anything like that. I mean, and the fact that some people choose to deal with that, or maybe some people don't necessarily choose. I think at a certain point with addiction, the choice is lost.
I think you've got people who are, you're dealing with it in one way or another, whether it's by letting it push you to focus on your business or your, family, or whether it is an escapist, way. There's a release valve somewhere to deal with the bullshit that we deal with every day.
Right.
And some people have fallen into a pattern of behavior that is not what society considers acceptable, unless it's this. And then you're kind of,
right.
You're okay
if it's
as long
this,
as you're
or
not
if it's a
causing
little
any problems.
tobacco, or whatever.
Exactly. As long as you're not causing any problems, as long as you're not running people down in the street, you're okay. But if you're doing pot, doing the pot, and
if you're getting all potted up on weeds,
getting all potted up,
as
then,
they say, as Fox News.
Actually, so just on the level of like how we are going about treating this, I've got just an interesting story I heard about a while ago. There was a really good Vice article about it, so there's probably people have heard about it, but the whole 21 Jump Street undercover cop in a high school.
Jesus Christ.
And apparently, like, when I first wrote about it, it was only the one school that I knew about, but it has gone on for more than that since then. And basically, you listen to some of the quotes. Sorry, the idea is that there was a few drug complaints from either parents or a couple students, or maybe a staff member or something, about a particular high school, and the superintendent of the school contacted, or at least allowed, he gave the authority to the police to conduct a sting operation where someone went undercover as a young student in the class. And I did a little bit of research on this. Apparently the guy was pulled out of police academy because he was perfect for the role. So he hadn't even completed his police academy
So he
training.
was Johnny Depp.
He was not even.
Was he a dreamboat?
Yes, apparently he was
a dreamboat.
He's quite. No, he apparently had braces, and he was baby faced, and he looked like a little kid. But the idea, they took a person who wasn't even a police officer at that point, and probably threw him through a little bit of training on how to deal with that, and then put him in a situation where he was told to find drugs and make arrests. And that became a whole mess where, in the specific instance that I'm thinking of, Exeter High School in California, it was a autistic kid and a few other kids as well. But he had convinced an autistic kid to get him drugs. The autistic kid would have never done this normally, and so that's entrapment, you would think.
Right.
But it's gone through, and they've all been charged.
I think entrapment laws, there are certain cases where entrapment laws are tacitly ignored.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. I mean, and most of the time, entrapment is misquoted as to like what it really is. But in this case, it was specifically a thing that a kid would not have done.
Right.
That the police officer, after many, many months of convincing him that he was his only friend and pressuring him constantly to find drugs, he finally went out and found drugs for his best friend, who was a police officer. There's another story where a kid fell in love with a girl who was a undercover cop.
I remember.
That's the one.
I remember hearing about that.
And had got drugs for her to impress her. It's creating criminals out of. First off, the whole crime in and of itself, to me, is not even a crime. But if you're going to look at it as a crime, you're creating criminals out of kids that would not normally have been. You read some of the article or some of the statements by like the superintendent. His last name's Groom. I can't remember. In the Exeter situation, I believe. But he sounds like the only way we're gonna get this is we're gonna have to send someone inside and just bust it all wide open, like it's some fucking like mafia drug ring.
Like it's a conspiracy.
It's kids high
smoking
school.
a little weed.
It's crazy. I think they did find like some ecstasy and like some LSD, but who the fuck cares? I mean, like you're talking about costing these kids their future from that point on. A few of them were 18, so they got full-on criminal records. Yeah. The other ones were not able to complete high school in that area unless their families moved. They were all expelled, and none of the other schools would take them. And what damage does that do to a kid anyway? Like, so you're talking about treating people like you're causing more problems than you would ever be doing on a treatment basis. So what is the purpose of that? And more importantly, should the superintendent have the authority to okay that kind of operation? Because I don't get that. Like, how does that guy? Because there was only like 3 people who knew about it, the police did need authority to go in and do it, and the superintendent was able to do that. I don't know. That seems to me not part of his purview, I would think, but lo and behold, he did anyway. So, anyway, I think it's an interesting story.
Goldfish, quickly, unquote. So no Boulder brownies for you guys. All right. Thank you very much, William.
We'll pass.
One thing I can say is great. Now we can tax it. So now we can tax it, and we bring it out of the office.
Sure, but what's going to keep
what do we say to the parents and kids? And that's a whole nother debate.
What's to keep somebody from getting all potted up on weed and then getting behind the wheel?
That's about right. That's right. You've been looking for that since I said potted up, haven't you?
I have been. That's one of my favorite intellectual quotes from Fox News.
That sounds about right.
All history.
That really does sound about right.
Yeah, and it just kind of goes to show the level of disconnect and really disinformation.
It is laughable, the amount of misconception.
I know that the amount of disinformation within Fox News is laughable in and of itself.
Sure,
but
this is by no means a Fox News thing. In fact, one of the articles I was reading about that school thing was, I think it was there was one on CNN and there was one on ABC, and you would just, and one on like LA Times and New York Post and stuff, they all, like the police version of it is that they went in and they just busted this shit open and they just rounded up all these troublemakers and they took them out of the problem, so none kids are going to have any problems. Actually, they're still doing drugs there. Not that was in any way doubt as far as I'm aware, but they're still doing drugs. They're being more cautious about it, and they've lost their respect for authority, the trust to authority to take care of them.
Of course, because you're creating, you're creating these laws, and this sort of public propaganda that says that this thing is going to kill you, that you're that if you smoke a little weed then you're going to go insane and you're going to go rob a liquor store in 2 weeks and you're
and that must be it, because
and you're going to die.
It's just going to kill you. Is we don't have that strict suicide laws, so if it really is about self-destruction,
it's not about safety at all.
What does it have to do with it? It's
not, and it's and one of the things that really disturbs me the most, and this is related to sort of specifically your two stories that you're talking about, is the school to prison, the so-called school to prison pipeline, where we're basically taking these kids that are just they're doing things, maybe they're making mistakes. I don't really know that they're really making mistakes.
I have questions myself.
Kids are gonna fucking do drugs. Kids are gonna experiment with different states of consciousness,
as they should, because that is what you want them to do, is to expand their understanding of the world to where they can become a responsible
and I
adult.
understand the idea of wanting to keep drugs out of the hands of kids whose brains are still developing, who
I get that.
Can do a little bit of damage to and create some sort of long-term harm.
Well, didn't we learn that the crack baby scare, like the whole concept of that, was a little false? I'm gonna have to look that up because I don't want to say something that's not absolutely true. But the damage of that, or maybe it was opium.
Crack.
Because I feel like crack can still cause fetal
it causes addiction within the fetus. So
I thought that they did a research study on the effects of opium in the mother's womb and found that it was not really that damaging to the child. But I don't want to be held to that. I'll look that up and we'll talk about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that as we tackle some sort of medical issues.
But as you were saying, the pipeline. Yeah,
the school to prison pipeline. I mean, we're criminalizing people for doing things that are completely natural, and I'm not saying that drugs are natural.
Well, we're creating an institution of criminals to fund people make money on prisons. Right. Privatization of prisons is...
Yeah, these guys in Philadelphia, these judges who were sending kids, who were taking bribes, to give kids long sentences in juvenile correction facilities, and destroying these kids' lives because they have, these records now. They pull them out of school, and it's you know, it's really doing long-term societal damage and destroying the opportunities available to these people.
Absolutely.
And it's for this, just so people can fucking grease somebody else's palm.
Certainly on that front, and then for the parents that would support that kind of, not for the pipeline, but for the parents that would be supporting the, you know, drug busts and things like that. You know, you're doing it you're costing another kid their future for the peace of mind, basically, because you're not doing anything but affecting your own peace of mind, that your kid is not going to be involved in any drugs. They're not going to have to deal with that. But the real world is that they will have to deal with that at some point.
They will have to deal with it.
And they will probably experiment with it, and hopefully...
Yeah, just like alcohol and tobacco when they're young. They're going to experiment with it. But, I mean, a certain amount of that is inevitable.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you want to stop kids from doing or from using drugs when they're in school, I mean, let's take a page out of the alcohol and the tobacco handbook. So you legalize it and you regulate it. So look at what we've managed to do with tobacco over the past 15 or 20 years with public awareness campaigns that demonstrate in a scientific and legitimate way the harmful effects of tobacco, and we inform kids, we educate them, and we prepare them, you know, for basically for the fact that, you know, they're at some point they're going to be confronted with the choice to do this or to not do this. You don't, and it's like abstinence only.
Yeah, it's a joke. Like, it's a joke.
Yeah, right. And if you tell people not to do something, that's immediately going to create an incentive where they're going to do it. And not only are they going to do it, they're going to do it on a completely uninformed basis.
They are going to keep it from anyone that could help them if they needed any help in that situation. If they needed to know, for that case, you know, like sexual protection, or if they needed to know, you know, like, oh, I have a drug problem now and I can't go to my mom because it's a black and white issue.
Right.
And
because my mom's going to call the cops and they're going to send me to jail for
which is lose everything. And,
I mean, there's a really personal story from my life that's, you know, closely related to that sort of thing. I mean, you know, when my sister was arrested for cocaine the second time around, it was our family that called the police on her. Because we didn't know what else to do.
Yeah.
And so this is sort of a little bit.
We don't have anyone else to call, do you?
Yeah, and you don't have anybody else. There's no other recourse. You can't, like, who else do you call aside from the police if you think that somebody that you care about is spiraling out of control with drugs?
Yep.
And, you know, like, in her case, and I think this is probably, you might agree that this was probably your case as well, that coming out of the prison system and being successful, I think, happened for her in spite of.
Yeah, it certainly was not because of.
Not because of.
Absolutely not because of. That was my pretty much my experience. Exactly. I was lucky enough to fall in with a couple good people who were dealing with the same problems that I was, but also had a good mindset with it. And I was able to ignore most of the kind of bullshit that was thrown at us and get somewhere to where it was a helpful thing. But I'll tell you what, I mean, you look at the statistics for people who are through treatment and through prison, and almost, I want to say it's like 90% relapse and go right back. And after so many times of doing that,
let's also sort of talk about we can touch a little bit on treatment and how ineffective our current methods of treatment
and I guess
usually are.
My thought was on that is that what is the system that we have in place that call the cops, go to jail, then get released to a treatment facility for 30 days, and then have a probation hanging over your head to where if you do fuck up, you go to jail for a long period of time. That doesn't work 90% of the time.
Right.
It might discourage a few people for a while, but eventually it catches up with you unless you get into a better mind space. But that is not done because you went to jail.
Isn't like Narcotics Anonymous also run by the heavily involved with the Mormon Church?
You know, I don't know. Honestly, it could be. There was never specifically Narcotics Anonymous where I was at.
Is it Mormons or is it Scientology?
I doubt it is Scientology because they do they really pound the the God higher power thing, and that's not necessarily a bad thing for people, and they try to teach you that it's not just God that is your higher power or whatever, but mostly
Scientology.
Is it really? Mm-hmm. That is fascinating. I guess it is. They do say it's higher power, not.
Oh, good. I found a website called Scientology's Front Groups.
That sounds useful.
www.zenu.net.
You guys write that shit down because that is a valuable thing to have in your life.
Yeah, let's see here. This is not as helpful as I was thinking.
It's as convoluted as Scientology itself.
Fox News broadcast memorial service. Okay, I was hoping for a list. You have a crappy web designer. So if you get a chance, look at www.zenu.
It's probably worth knowing what is run by Scientology, and that is certainly true.
But yeah, Narcanon has really close ties with Scientology, according to the all-knowing Wikipedia. So that kind of reminds me of this other sort of situation of questionable ties. So is it necessarily a bad thing that Narcanon has close ties with Scientology? Of course not.
Yeah.
But non-science-based treatment programs, I think, are...
That is actually a really fascinating point and not angle that I necessarily had thought of before. But why are we not applying science to the process of rehabilitating people that have a scientific medical dependence?
Right. There are places that do that. There are places that use science-based rehabilitation.
Probably aren't going to be available to you on a... You can't afford to go there.
Yeah, you can't afford to go there. It's not your average 12-step program where it's available to everybody and so on and so forth.
Just to be clear, 12-step programs are still not available to everyone because you can go to any meeting, but any like inpatient treatment, anything like that follows a 12-step program, it is prohibitively expensive to do that. Yeah. And the only time you're going to probably have the money to do that
is basically because you're paying for a hospital bed for 3 months.
Yeah. I would say that
$1,200 a night or whatever.
There's some shady shit that goes on there too, where, like for instance, when you get out of that and you go into your outpatient, you are still getting funded, but you have to pay rent to them.
Right.
And so it's not really justified quite why.
So it's sort of a racket where you have public funding set up and you have then an institution that has grown up strictly for the purpose not of helping people, but of extracting that money
and to be honest,
from the public
that
programs.
In of itself was one of the biggest things. It was never, did you do your therapy? Did you do anything like that?
Right.
Granted, I'm not going to say everyone there was
did you check in? Did you pay your rent?
Yes.
Yeah.
Pay your rent is the biggest thing. If you can't find a job because you're a felon, you are out there more than 8 hours a day walking around because you don't have a car.
Right.
I mean, it is a nightmare. And not to say that instilling hard work ethics is a bad thing, but you can tell the level of priorities, and that is a little bit of a bad thing. That definitely interferes with your ability to take the thing seriously. And
we can talk about this in a later episode. I'd just like to bring it up since we're kind of on the subject. Like your typical treatment program, your typical 12-step and Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous programs. So I've seen statistics that their success rates their best success rates approach somewhere around 10%.
Yes, that's what I mean. I'm saying 9 out of 10 fail. It's
so
absolutely the case.
we can talk. I think you were kind of taking the angle that there's that the institutions that are built to try to help people with their problems aren't really on the up and up, and they're not really looking out for these people. But again, I want to stress the fact that these are non-science based.
And that's, I'm not saying
methodologies.
Exactly.
And so we can compare that to some things that are experiencing some pretty good success rates right at the moment.
I think that would be really great. Yeah.
So
take a look at that.
Some of those I think we'll talk about in a later episode of something that I'm really fascinated about is the use of psychedelics in addiction treatment.
I think that's a really good place to start. So I think that you're looking at the
which have hugely successful or huge success rates. So approaching somewhere closer to 70% versus 10%.
That's fascinating. That is fascinating.
With things like psilocybin mushrooms and LSD.
That is absolutely fascinating. So we are failing on, if you want to believe that on a legal front, we are, rounding these people up to get them help. We are putting them through the wrongs to get them help. We're really not. We're failing them on both a treatment and legal basis. And I don't know if we're going to wrap up here, but before we do, I wanted to
we've got some time.
We've got some time. Okay, cool. Just stepping away from some of the treatment aspects. Do you have something you want to bring up?
Nope. Go ahead, please.
All right, so in Kansas, so this is us.
Oh, it is us. And my headphones fell off twice.
Nice. Nice. So it was April 2012, and
I'm an idiot.
The day was 420. I'm assuming that the police,
it was Hitler's birthday?
It was, that's what I assumed that the police were raiding people for pot was. It was more to do with Hitler's birthday than anything else.
Right.
So there's an article in Washington Post. It's pretty interesting to read, but I'll just kind of summarize it because I think it brings up some interesting points. But so the article is called "Federal Judge Drinking Tea and Shopping at Gardening Store is Probable Cause for a SWAT Raid." It's kind of a messy title there, but that is one of them.
Drinking tea
and shopping at a gardening store.
So
let me just
you're a hippie having your Tazo and your
what's more fascinating is you're not a hippie, you're actually two former analysts of the CIA with a family.
Fantastic.
Yep. And so their names are Robert and Addie Hurt.
I love this already.
I could say Robbie is his name, but they have a kid. They have two kids. They have a 7-year-old and a 13-year-old at the time. Anyway, so basically what happened is father and son went to gardening store to buy some supplies, and there was a police officer who was outside there.
Fucking hydroponics.
That was the argument, and this police officer was not writing down their license, he was writing down everybody's license. So that means that we are using a non-illegal act to be evidence of a criminal act enough to be the focus of an investigation. So what they did was they wrote down every license plate number of anyone who went in there, and then they put them in a database, and then they mumbo jumboed it where they picked who should be the most likely to be the cause of growing a grow. And then they went and they searched their trash, and they found tea, tea leaves. They were saturated plant substances is what the police report listed it as. They tested positive for THC, but here's the interesting thing. There was no way they could have tested positive for THC, because once they raided their house, they burst them with gunpoint, put all the family down on the ground, went through the whole rigmarole. Dangerous as that is.
Shot their fucking dog, I'm sure.
Pretty much. There was nothing there. They made them sit there for 2 hours while they tore the house apart, even though 20 minutes in they knew they weren't going to find a grow lab. And then at that point they changed it to a personal use search since they weren't going to find anything a grow on a selling basis. But what's interesting is that there's so many more things in this event and in other events like it that has tested positive for THC, and so I'm just going to list them and you can understand how ridiculous these things are. Sage, chocolate chip cookies, motor oil, spearmint, soap, tortillas, dough, deodorant, billiard chalk, let's see, pet chow, flour, eucalyptus, breath mints, Jolly Ranchers, and vitamins. So
those dangerous breath mints.
The argument that was brought up with this is, well, they tested positive for THC in the trash, and the police are legally able to search your trash. If you're not aware of that, if you put something in the trash, it is not public.
Well, if you put it in the trash, they
they
can't mess with it. But as soon as you put it out on the street, then they can come by and just dump it in their trunk. And
so just fair warning to everyone: if you're not aware of that rule, you do not need to give them permission on that.
Yep.
But what I think is interesting is that so many of these substances tested positive, and so I did a little research on it, and I found that in response to this event and some others like it, they did some testing on the efficacy of these tests, these drug tests, both urine analysis and others, the portable drug tests that they use. They found that it is surprisingly easy to fake a result. Not even you have to introduce something, but you fake a result, open the thing to an air, shake it up, and it tests positive. So if you need a result of a positive, you think someone's in there who has been, growing, whether you have any proof or not, if you need some positive result to give you permission to go in, it is the most criminally easy thing to fake, basically.
Wow.
And I'm not saying that all cops are doing that. I'm saying that sometimes
rules get bent.
Exactly, because you think you've got the right guy.
You're working for the greater good.
Exactly, and that is... Obviously, in this case, no one was hurt. That's great. I'm sure they were wildly pissed off that their house was ripped apart, and that the extent of the search warrant that they were issued had just playfully gotten extended, which I don't think is technically illegal, but I guess they did it anyway. But just to trace that back to, you're at a fucking gardening store and you're getting your license plate written down, is that really,
Right.
We've been talking about the legalization.
Never mind the fact that most of the time, the only reason that we're hearing about this shit is because we've got two former CIA agents.
Yes, exactly.
Never mind the fact that this, happens on a widespread scale all over the United States every single day to those of us that aren't
newsworthy,
right, or that don't have power, right?
Yep.
Or for or if you're just fucking not white. So
that's certainly yeah.
I mean, there's 8 times, if you're African American, you're 8 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana than if you're white. Even though study after study or survey after survey shows that usage rates among white communities and black communities are exactly identical.
And
white people smoke pot exactly as much as black people. White people use cocaine exactly as much as black people. But we use drug laws to demonize minority and impoverished populations.
You know what? That is a really...
because we can take advantage of those people and we can put them into for-profit prisons. We can lock them in a fucking cage, and they become that extra little person that was, because how easy is it to arrest a pothead and put him in jail so that you can get your occupancy rates up? I mean,
your occupancy rates, your clearance rates, your crime rates, which is part of the issue. And I want to talk about
for-profit prisons. They sign contracts with these companies that say,
you gotta have so many people.
Will provide you with enough people to keep a 100% occupancy rate at all times. It's like the most predictably busy hotel you can imagine.
Yep.
Like hotels have to deal with the fact that sometimes they don't have a full population or a full booking.
But not prisons.
But not prisons.
Well, so basically you're looking at a situation where you're not going around looking to even enforce a law. However,
you're commoditizing people who are the most powerless in society. You're turning them into a source of cash for an industry that does not give a fuck about people's health. It does not give a fuck about people's well-being. I'm really pretty adamant about this.
I fully. I mean, I think it's a fully valid point. In fact, going back to that, just a quick throwback that police in the sting operation with the high school, he specifically and others like him have targeted, the outsiders, the minorities, the learning disabled, because they're easier to either convict to do something. You are not.
They're defenseless.
They're defenseless. Yeah, that's the way to do it. Whether or not it's before the crime or after the crime. Oh, another black kid got got weed. We're not going to blink about that. Or some mentally disabled person is bought pot for a cop who told him he was his best friend and he wouldn't hang out with him unless he bought him pot or something, and he doesn't really have anyone to speak for himself. Luckily, his family is actually speaking up pretty violently, not violently, but vehemently,
aggressively.
So.
Which good for them. They should. But I mean, like,
it doesn't help everyone.
I mean, and we talk about for-profit prisons and things like that, and let alone the militarization of the police, which is a direct result of the drug war. Because, that's the original reason, the original reason for the creation of groups like SWAT teams and things were to deal with situations, really dangerous situations that your average cop can't get into. And they were very small groups within police departments in major cities all over the United States. But if you look at today, if you look at this piece of shit little suburb of St. Louis called Ferguson that has fucking tanks and a population of the 20,000 people, and it's a symptom of the fact that and the funding for all that stuff, by the way, comes directly from the war on drugs, because the war on drugs was radically ramped up the amount of money that we spend on militarized police units so that they could deal with narcotics and
before we wrap up, I do want to throw a few numbers on that. So there are some definite okay, are we wrapping up now, basically? Or are we going to keep going? Okay, so just a aside here. So in 2010, the U.S. government spent $15 billion on the war on drugs, and that was $500 a second. Today...
Jesus fucking Christ.
Let's see. Sorry, I had it right here. So if the U.S. would stop enforcing the war on drugs, just stop, period, they would save $41 billion just today, if you did it today and from here on out. If you taxed an estimated $46.7 billion would be made. You'd be taking it out of the hands of a drug trade. I guess you would say the UN estimated that the current drug trade is worth $32 billion. And I think I already told you about the $1 million the illegal users. But so just think about those numbers and tell me we don't have enough money to keep Science Club open, but we have to make a cut so we can have the football team. The New Jersey.
But you're never going to run out of money
for that,
for a situation where you've convinced everyone that society has an enemy.
Right. Well, and so here I want to...
You're never going to run out of money for bombs. You're never going to run out of money for militarized police.
Sure.
Until, I hate to say this, but it is kind of... fortunate that we have sort of uprisings happening all over the country nowadays, because it's bringing attention to the fact that these people in cities where there's militarized police departments, they're under occupation. For lack of a better word, right?
Yeah.
You've got an occupying force that is seeking to suppress and oftentimes to extort, as we saw in Ferguson, money from the population for no good reason, for nonviolent things. The law is supposed to be there to deal with people who harm others.
Yeah, the intention is to keep you and yours safe from others that are in the system, not to punish someone for.
And again, what's the best way to take the power, i.e., the money, away from the drug cartels.
Remove their main source of income.
Remove
I
their
would
main
think,
source of income by legalizing and regulating
and taxing it. I mean, even if you
decriminalize.
That's the thing is, I want to make clear is like the legalization on a whole front is a sticky issue, and I'm willing to acknowledge that most people are not ready to jump on that bandwagon.
Right.
But taking it out of it,
I'm cautious about it,
and I think that is something, as we all should be. We should be doing some experiments about that. We should be doing scientific studies about that, which I think are very limited. Because
but we have
don't get
several examples of people who've decriminalized, and we've seen.
And that's what I think where the step is that we are.
And it's not just decriminalization; it's also turning the funds that are used from policing and turning that around into support, and turning that into treatment, and turning that into. I
mean, tell me you don't have. And I'm so sorry. I said $15 billion a year. It was actually $15 billion was federal government. $25 billion was also state and local governments combined.
Christ.
So it is way more than I even initially stated. Tell me that we don't have enough money to send kids to college, for free, basically, and try to help them get out of whatever situation that they're in. Try to help them deal with the societal influences that are causing them to stray into what we currently consider destructive behavior. And if you do help them get out of it, you would have all the funding you would ever want to help them get out of it. And so just to kind of reiterate, in 1925, H.L. Meccan. Oh man, I can't even spell his name. But he was a guy. He was making a plea to stop prohibition, and basically what he says is it has failed in all of its promises and actually created additional serious and disturbing social problems throughout society.
Right. And again, just take a look at alcohol prohibition.
Yep, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Yep.
What that created. There were more alcoholics at the end of prohibition than there were at the beginning, right?
That's absolutely the case. Yes. More criminals.
So
more crime, organized crime, more corruption.
More criminals, more violent crime, because the violent crime comes directly from the fact that you've got you're creating a network of criminals to support the population, something that the population is not going to go without,
absolutely.
whether you want them to or not. So I guess one final little thing that I want to kind of talk about here is just a little bit of information about, and by the way, obviously I love alcohol, and so I'm a big fan. Yeah. I'm a big fan.
He's a little bit more than me, but yeah, we both enjoy it.
I'm a big fan. A gentleman, an English gentleman by the name of David Nutt, has published two different studies that he's conducted based on personal and interpersonal harm as far as drugs are concerned. Or as far as various different drugs are concerned. So consistently at the top of the list, the most harmful drug, according to his, I don't know, I've got his 2014 study up in front of me right now. But alcohol is by far the most harmful drug that we have. Followed not so closely by heroin, followed closely by cocaine.
It would have been methamphetamine after that.
Cocaine and heroin are both pretty close to one another. Methamphetamine is slightly lower. I think methamphetamine, because the rate of usage is slightly less
in UK.
In the UK, yes.
Yeah, because I think this in the United States that's vastly
this
different.
is the UK study. I think methamphetamine is a fairly uniquely American thing, and
as is our treating of drugs.
Well, American and North Korean apparently, but
really? Oh wow.
Yeah,
interesting.
North Korea has a big methamphetamine problem. What's the least harmful? What do you want to say?
I would say marijuana.
Surprise, surprise, it's actually mushrooms.
Oh, yeah, I didn't even consider mushrooms. That makes perfect sense. Actually,
Cannabis.
Cannabis still has some, like, I would think some, like, lung impact. Wouldn't, maybe not, I don't know.
Actually, from what I've listened to a couple of podcasts with some doctors who study the harmful effects of cannabis. It's strangely high on the list here. It's above benzodiazepines on this particular list, which
I find a little surprising.
Yeah, but there's not really any sort of correlation between lung disease and cannabis, smoking cannabis. And a lot of the people that I've listened to have indicated that might be because it has powerful anti-inflammatory properties. So the fact that you're taking in the tar and the smoke is counteracted by the fact that it's an anti-inflammatory agent. But also, I think if you look at the contents of what's in tobacco smoke, for example, there's radioactive elements in tobacco plants that and they spray the shit with radioactive elements a lot of times as well, which definitely contributes to lung disease and particularly cancer. Ecstasy, extremely low on the list. LSD, extremely low on the list. Cannabis, you can't die from an overdose.
It's a big one. That helps a little bit.
And the same is true.
I felt like I was going to die.
Yeah, the same is true of you'll feel like you're going to die, but the same seems to be true of LSD and mushrooms, which I think is really interesting. And I'd really love to, in an episode coming up, talk about the as I mentioned before, the psychological benefits of psychedelics.
Yeah, using psychedelics. I agree with that. I think that's maybe the next
because
one.
It's something
that
is only starting to be realistically explored at this point, and the results of some of the preliminary studies are pretty astounding.
Awesome. Well, guys, anything to add? I'm pretty good. I could give my list, but I think we've kind of covered most stuff.
I think we're somewhere around an hour.
We're right at an hour. We promised to keep it short, at least this time.
Yeah.
We've prohibition overburdens penal systems, courts. It creates emotional, financial harm. Physical harm. I think we pretty much covered my big talking points on that. So
did we say anything of use? I don't know. You guys make sure to let us know via Twitter. We are at Clickbait Pod. You can also visit our Facebook page where we are the Clickbait Podcast. And thanks for joining us again. And stick with it, people. Keep your head down, do your work, and be a good Puritan American.
Don't get tested for drugs.
Right. All right. Peace. Thanks.